You're listening to Raising Anchor, the Rhode Island FC podcast, now part of the Blazing Musket family. We're glad you're here. Hello and welcome to Raising Anchor, your podcast and source for all things Rhode Island FC. I'm your host, Matt Entrican, and joining me today for our last episode of 2024 is RIFC Assistant General Manager Sean Carey. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you and talking about Rhode Island FC.
The honor is all mine. I couldn't think of a better guest to wrap up this year. It's at a time where we get to reflect and look back, but also look ahead and see what's going on. You know, I think about the first time that I met you in person, and I always remind myself of this interaction. I don't know if you remember it, but I said, hi, coach, how are you doing? And you went out of your way very politely to remind me that you're not, in fact, a coach with this team, but you are the assistant general manager. And, I think in the world of soccer operations and football culture, there's titles like general manager, sporting director, technical director, so many vice president of personnel. There's so many different titles that can muddy the water out there. Can we start things off by first explaining what exactly is the assistant general manager of Rhode Island FC do?
It's a great question, and I do remember that interaction and I really appreciate all of our interactions. Assistant general manager for Rhode Island FC, because I think that these titles can have different meanings depending on the organization. But specifically with Kano, it's been I work very closely with Kano, obviously. We've known each other a long time. And when he asked me to be involved with the organization, it was very flattering and humbling. And having the opportunity to work with someone that you're a big believer in, first and foremost as a person and a human being, and secondly as a very motivated, competent, articulate person to lead this organization. That's a lot of responsibility and something I take really seriously. And my main role is to help him and the rest of the staff be as successful as possible. And for the most part, that entails allowing him to remain as focused on the team, on the field as possible. So when you see players signed, all the players that we have, these are players that Kano has wanted to have involved. So our roster this past season and the roster we're building this season, these are players that he believes in. And then my role is to interact with the agents or the players initially and talk to them about what we are and who we are as a club, and not so much sell the club, because we really shouldn't have to do that, but just articulate the infrastructure that we have in place for the players to be successful, and then try to finish up the deal so that those players end up playing for Rhode Island FC.
So Kano's at the forefront in the spotlight, good or bad, and you're the one behind the scenes pulling the strings.
Well, I wouldn't say pulling the strings. Kano, as he should be, is in the forefront, and being his, I think I joke with him sometimes about different profiles of players. You talk about someone being a Batman or someone being a Robin, and I've been in situations where I'm Batman and have a Robin that I wouldn't be able to be successful without, and Kano's definitely the Batman, and I enjoy being his Robin to do the things to help us all be successful, including interacting really closely with the rest of the technical team, who are, really, really incredible.
So when I looked at your resume, I found bits and pieces where I could. I know that when you were in your collegiate time still playing as a player for Transylvania University, you then moved on at one point and you steered the ship with the Seacoast United Phantoms in the early USL days. I guess I'd be curious, what has been your soccer journey? Where was your start, and where did it land when you became the assistant general manager of Rhode Island FC?
So I played in college, and after college there was no USL, there was no MLS. So we're talking early 90s, and really the only place you could make money playing soccer was here in New England, one of the only places. And the place that people played here in New England was the Laza League, Portuguese league with all the Portuguese clubs. So I spent a lot of time in Rhode Island and Southeast Massachusetts playing down here in Laza in the early 90s, which was the best time, the best players. Anybody who's in their late 40s, early 50s, late 50s will reminisce of their times of Laza. Then the USL appeared, and I did play for the New Hampshire Phantoms, Cape Cod Crusaders. I played in what is now the USL, but was USISL until I was 35, and taught elementary school at the same time. And then coached youth kids along the way, some club soccer along the way. I ended up coaching New Hampshire Phantoms for 2 years, took a year off, then coached them for 2 seasons with some success. And then they went to Seacoast. It wasn't Seacoast, it was New Hampshire Phantoms at that time. That springboarded interactions with a lot of people that I had played with in the soccer world. And I ended up running youth soccer leagues around the country, mostly in New England initially, and then other parts of the country, which led to another opportunity. I worked for AS Roma for 5 years, and they had partnerships. So that was all the lead in a lot of kind of management of different soccer organizations, and having interacted with Connell throughout his playing career and post-playing career as well.
So how did that interaction with Kano first start? Were you just someone on the radar of the New England soccer scene that he knew of, or is there something a little bit more personal between the two of you that established this connection?
There's more of a personal relationship with each other. So when Kano was playing for the Revolution, and I was finished with my playing career, but I still organized a little fight club game. We played on Sundays and Wednesdays, and that's when there was a little bit longer preseason MLS. So Shaori, Kano, some of the other guys, we would play with each other. And that when Kano, when he finished playing, we played together some, and he was with the New England Revolution. We just developed a nice friendship with each other that just grew organically, to be honest, Matt. It was, as he progressed through his coaching career, we would catch up every now and again. I'd call him, check in, see how he's doing, see if he needed anything, if I had an opportunity, whatever he needed. So when he got this, he reached out about being involved, and I gave him some feedback as to what I thought things he should think about, and was really honored when I ended up being able to take the role with him.
You said a minute ago you were an elementary school teacher during your playing time. I believe you still are an elementary school teacher.
Well, this year I am. It started back in September. This is my 30th year. The club has been very supportive of letting me go back for my 30th class this year. So in September, since September, I've been kind of bridging the gap on both sides, which I will do through June, and fulfilling my obligations. So it's early mornings, actually a lot of interest from overseas right now. So early morning Zooms and WhatsApp calls with people from all over the country and world involved and interested in what we're doing. But I am enjoying my 30th class right now. And being around the players here in Rhode Island, it's very similar, where that, not comparing them, how they act at any level, but just how you want to see them be successful, right? And how you want to create an environment for them to feel comfortable as people, so that they can be successful as players, because they are people first, and we've treated them like that, like men, and not like as they should be. So that part of creating a community, if you will, has been really rewarding, or being part of this community has been incredibly rewarding.
I can only imagine if you can navigate the trials and tribulations of growing young minds, dealing with players and their agents must be second nature almost at this point after, what you said, 30 years then? Congratulations on that milestone.
Yeah. Well, the agents have been wonderful to work with, I think, for the most part. I've always tried to get to know them as human beings first, and people, and learn a little bit more about them and what their motivates them and how they're doing. We've had really positive interactions with candidly everyone we've worked with, and we're looking forward to continuing to work with these people and meeting new people and helping us continue to get better every season.
You'd mentioned about the acquisitions and the negotiations. Roster construction is one of my favorite things. It always fascinates me. I guess if we were to go back, looking, this is 2023 for the 2024 season, how does that process start when it comes to roster construction for you? Is there a catalyst? Is there an idea? If you had to go nuts to bolts here, what's the overall summary of it? How do you get from no players whatsoever to you're fielding at least 18 on game day and then going beyond to the full roster?
It was a fascinating experience, I would say. And again, I think Kano deserves all of the credit for his vision and his commitment to having the right people and the right people in the room. And that was unerring on his part. We met some very good players. If we didn't have the feeling that they were going to be right for us on the field and off the field, it didn't matter where we were in the process. We stayed the course, and that was the course that Kano set for himself. So I think for the most part, you have to, I don't want to say bluff, because bluff's the wrong word, but you always had to be presenting as if everything was like, we're good, things are good. Everything is going right according to plan, we're right on timeline, and we couldn't be happier how things are going. And so some of it's self-fulfilling, I would say. You look at things in life, whether they're self-fulfilling in a positive or a negative way. We have decided to be self-fulfilling in a positive way. And we've often talked about when some things didn't go the way we wanted them to, we realized that they were actually going exactly the way that they were supposed to go. We just didn't quite realize it at the time. So, between Kano's vision, the commitment of Dave McKay, Marcos, Carl, Jason Gove, behind the scenes, and their wide array of connections, it was instrumental in helping us craft this roster that I think people really enjoyed, not only for how they performed on the field, but how they interacted with the crowd, how the crowd and the fans felt a real connection with them on a human level.
Was it, looking back now, you're already working on the 2025 strategy, but was it a lot harder to do your job in a season where there was no club? There was nothing, physically there yet. It was a theory, it was an application, it was a promise, but it wasn't tangible yet. I'm sure the answer can vary definitely on different degrees here, but you're now in 2025. Is it a lot easier to do your job now than it was in 2023 going to 2024?
I think this might sound counter, I would say that it's actually more difficult right now. I think the difficulty started the day after we lost the final, in where we had to meet with players that helped get us to that final, and we had to let some of them know that we weren't going to be bringing them back next season, and those aren't easy conversations to have, especially when everyone was amazing, whether they were playing or not playing. So right from the day after the final, having to say goodbye to some guys was difficult. And then the other portion of that is that we had to build a whole roster. So all these players that were coming at us, we had 26 spots. And so, okay, there were things to work from. Now we're getting even more volume of interest, higher quality level of players, but we're only looking to bring in a couple of players. So we're trying to vet through which one of these players really helps us get to the next level, right? And the only next level that we have at this point is, next season, and try now to do this past season, So we've stayed focused not on anything other than getting together, finding these right couple of players that are going to come in, fit with the group, raise the level, while simultaneously maintaining the type of atmosphere and camaraderie that we had last season. So I think overall, I don't want to say tedious, but it's maybe tedious, but not in a bad way, in a good way for all of us. Yeah, it's more difficult to make sure you're doing that right way, and then simultaneously having a vision of where you want, because as soon as we start preseason in January, right, you're already thinking about 2026. That's just the reality in my role. Kano's continuing to be focused in real time. I'm focused in real time while simultaneously trying to think of the next season. And that involves, finding different profiles of player, a younger player that could come in and be really exciting as a 19 or 20-year-old and push this club and have this be a platform for him to showcase his abilities and maybe go on to bigger and better things in a way that because I think that's a vision of the club. So those are all things that you keep in mind. And then, the club is anchored in community. And so you never want to lose focus on that when you're building your roster. And you want that to be front and center in terms of making sure that all of the local possibilities are being assessed, and people that are in Rhode Island feel like this is that we stay true to that from a roster construction. We're anchored in community because we want to have the best team possible, but also want to make sure that we're living up to that motto.
And I'm so glad you talk about that. There's definitely a flavor of regional impact on this squad in its current iteration and hopefully in the future. And you can see the influences of all of the technical staff and the relationships that they've built with these players and these academies across the Northeast. I guess I would ask specifically, once you've looked at the regional assessment at the USL level, is there a system of order, a table of operations, and how you then kind of go through the ranks, if you will? Is it do you look specifically at certain leagues? Do you look at specific geographical areas? Is there a specific age or type of player profile that you start looking for? Like, where do you go when you want to start assessing that next level of talent for the team?
So we started that this season, where the top local youth clubs, the biggest youth clubs in New England, we had their technical teams in, to visit and spend time with us. So their technical directors or one or two staff members would come in. And first and foremost, you want them to see behind the curtain and see how professional this is, and watch training and meet the coaching staff and see the training room and how well the players are looked after, and come to a game and have an authentic experience, so that they would know that if one of their players advanced, if they have a 17, 18, 19-year-old player, that this could be a professional pathway for them. This is what that looks like. So we had really positive experiences at a variety of levels at that tier of player. When you're looking at that younger 17 to 19-year-old player, an academy player, or even professional player, that's where you would start those kind of conversations. We had a player up for a week from one of the clubs in New York that we have a good rapport with the director of that club. So that was a win-win opportunity. And anytime we can showcase the professionalism of our staff and the resources that we have made available to us by the club, then that's a win for all of us, even if those players don't end up with us, as we build this network of relationships and players. Once they get a little bit older, now you're dealing with different people from all over the world right now that want to learn more about what we're doing, and finding out whether there's opportunities for win-win opportunities at a variety of levels for players that maybe are 20 to 22 or 23.
One of the most fascinating things in talking with ownership with Rhode Island FC has been that there, at least for now, is not an interest in moving forward with an academy system that's specifically attached to Rhode Island FC. There's a partnership, like you mentioned, with the academies both in Rhode Island, like Bayside, and then abroad. There's an investment in seeing what will happen there. When you look at that, is that the path forward in the modern evolution of the game? I think of New England Revolution and their academy system, and it took decades for that to bear fruit. Is the idea now these cross collaborations and partnerships versus just anchoring one single academy and hoping that a product comes out of it over the next 10 years?
For the most part, I think it's important to do a few things really, really well, as opposed to any number of things not especially well. And with the new stadium coming on board, with us anchored in community, with us having relationships with any number of people from all of the different clubs in Rhode Island and Southeast Massachusetts and in New England in general, I think it's important to continue to build those relationships and find out what the best way forward is to amplify the things that the clubs are currently doing and finding win-win opportunities for Rhode Island in those clubs where their players could potentially end up playing for Rhode Island FC someday. But like anything, and I think you know this from watching you interact with the supporters group, so much of what you do is relationship-based. And relationship-based isn't email. Relationship-based is shaking hands and spending time with each other and wanting to see people be successful. And that's what our big focus has been, is building those relationships, maintaining those relationships. So that might sound like a long-winded, and I'm not dodging that question at any level. That's my sincere thought on that, is that we need to figure out what that looks like while simultaneously maintaining all of the good relationships and goodwill that we have in the community now.
Does that become difficult? Because I know in MLS there are geographical locks, like player or clubs can't go recruiting or sniffing around in certain markets. I haven't heard of that existing in the USL. So is it just more about being a good neighbor right now as the newest professional organization in the soccer landscape?
Well, I think you can be a good neighbor, but if you're a really nice neighbor, but you're not really good at what you do, then being a good neighbor isn't going to lead to opportunities for us, right? So yes, we are being good neighbors with everybody, while simultaneously showing through our performances on the field by our willingness to have people on site for training to see what we're doing, wanting them to be part of seeing what we're doing, that the level of competence, right, and the level of opportunity combined with being a good neighbor makes for an exceptional relationship that we could have. So that's what I would argue is the goal.
And then in 2024, we had an open tryout for the team. One I've not yet seen this season. I imagine if there was going to be one, it probably didn't happen because of the combination of a deep playoff push. It's really hard to kind of articulate that when you go this far in. Plus, there was the re-signing of so many of the core group of players. Is an open tryout something that we'll expect to see in a future landscape, or is that something that maybe isn't in the future machinations of the club?
I don't see there being an open tryout, certainly not for this season. And that's not to diminish people's opportunity to be seen and by the coaching staff, or opportunities for someone to showcase themselves. I think the return on investment of running something like that would be hard to rationalize right now. But we still have our ear to the ground. We're still fielding phone calls and relationship questions from people locally that have a player that they think, we definitely should see. And when those opportunities come up, those players will get a chance once we get into preseason to see it over a course of a day or two if there's an opportunity.
And then, I look, again, just thinking through all of the different navigations in the off season. The initial roster decisions are out. I look at MLS. They've just released all of theirs as well. MLS is an interesting system because it's a single entity. They have made up dollar mechanisms inside the organization. USL operates more in the traditional footballing sense. is it easier or more difficult to negotiate with players for contracts or for interest here in the USL landscape? And, have there been any mechanics unique to USL that have either helped or gotten in your way as you've looked at either last season or this current season's build?
Well, my frame of reference on that, having not necessarily negotiated an MLS contract or lived in that ecosystem, right? I wouldn't be able to answer that with total clarity from the lens of negotiating with the players that we've negotiated, and we've had some interesting negotiations, and we have with each, you want to treat each individual negotiation as its own and respect every player, regardless of how the contract turns out. I think that the USL is an amazing opportunity for players. I think that it's growing. I think that the level of sophistication with the different agents and their ability to really be looking out for their players, and for players to be looking out for themselves. And this is full time. This is what they're doing for their living. So you want to be super respectful of people's time through the process, the players' time, the agents' time, our club's time, and you want to make sure that you're evolving as a club and a negotiator, and trying to get a little bit better at what you do, have more tools in your toolbox each time you talk, and have a real clear vision as to what you want to be doing. Thankfully for us, we have a clear vision. Kano's and the staff's, what they think will help us continue to be successful is clear, and so that makes it easier to negotiate, I would say.
What would you say is the key to a successful player and agent negotiation? Is it just the same thing as at the time, or is there making sure expectations are set? How would you say when you walk out of that room, that was a successful interaction?
To be totally candid, each initial conversation I have, I really don't look to go in to try to get the deal done in the first conversation. I think...
You mean it's not here's the paper, here's the offer, and they slide it back?
Yeah. No, I think we've actually been pretty shrewd in how we go about doing that. We have a really nice document that we share with the agent in advance that highlights some of the terms, but also highlights the club as a whole, and the initial conversation with any agent or players about the entire infrastructure. So what are you really getting to be part of this? So I think it's you know pretty quickly whether the other person is in it to hear about the bigger picture and what's in the best interest of their player as a human being and the whole experience, or whether it's just dollars or cents. And I'm not passing judgment on which way. Either one is fine. You just know which way it's going to go, and so then you navigate that interaction accordingly.
One of the most fascinating things about the work ahead for you, like I mentioned earlier, is so many of these players we've now learned were on multi-year deals. I've talked to people in the league, I've talked to people in the USLPA, and that is not the normal when it comes to expansion clubs. It's usually a trial and error, find out what worked and what didn't. You've brought back so many players now through this natural progression. It speaks volumes at the amount of confidence you and Kano and the rest of the technical staff had to offer multi-year contracts before there was ever the first kick. Looking back, it's easy. We made it to the final. I'm sure you could summarize it as such, but you didn't know that at the beginning of the season. Certainly when we didn't get our second win until June, was there ever a moment where you were like, hey, did we sort the right players? Did we make sure that we went out and got what we needed? Or was this going to be oh man, the retool and the end of the year is going to be a nightmare?
Throughout the entire season, if you spent time with us on a day-to-day basis, you wouldn't have known whether we were training for the Eastern Conference Final or training for the game, training for Louisville after we lost to Memphis or drew with Memphis. Kano and the staff did an amazing job of just keeping an even keel. An even keel. That's in training, in the lunch, in breakfast, interacting with everybody. And the players the players were the same. So was there ever a time where we looked and said, whoa, we may have gotten some of this wrong? That didn't happen. That did not happen. But again, I would say that was Kano's ability through his previous experiences in Birmingham and just the time and effort he's put into this to have fully vetted every one of these players and for him to believe and the rest of the staff to believe in what it is that their goal was, which wasn't to just create a one-off team for just one season. And it wasn't just to find all the supposed best players, it was to make a team. And I would argue that the vast majority of games we were better than the sum of our parts, and that doesn't happen unless you have a clear vision of what you want things to be and how and which players you want to be part of that for the foreseeable future.
I look back at the signings that came across your desk, yours and Kano's. First there's Koke Vegas, an incredible first signing. We see J.J. Williams at the kit reveal party. And then it's like not to be outdone by your successes. You go out and kind of in the middle of January, you go out and secure Albert Dikwa, then the previous year's Golden Boot winner. I remember after Dikwa got signed, there was a lot of people watching how RIFC would kind of set themselves up for that first year. And it was, they don't have a stadium. They're going to be playing out of a college. Like, does New England even know how to play soccer still? And then, that Dikwa signing really all of a sudden put this spotlight on the club. And, regardless of the team's performance metrics, did you realize then the statement you'd be making to the rest of the league? Because we've gone from this, I don't want to call it pariah, but this questionable thing to now suddenly we've reinvented the mold for USL expansion. Was any of that ever on your mind as you guys realized the talent that you were starting to stack and load into this group?
I don't know that in real time, when you're doing it, I don't know that you have time to look at it from that type of elevation really in real time. Now kind of maybe reflecting back on it in conversations, kind of, an autopsy, if you will, on the season, you look back and say, wow, that was, but in real time, you're trying to get that deal done, right? Which was an interesting one to get done, as they all were. And you you're thinking about it strictly from the player's perspective. So what are we doing to make sure that, for example, as you referenced Albert, what are we doing to make sure that Albert comes in and has every opportunity to be as successful as possible, acclimating himself to a new place, acclimating himself to a new style of play, new technique, a new staff. Those are the things that you're really thinking about on a day-to-day operational kind of way. It's great that it gets us it's great on Instagram and it's great for the club, but for those of us that are within the day-to-day, if that makes any sense, kind of how
you're living and breathing it. Yeah. So then I guess I would ask you, with those spots that you had preluded to a little earlier, we now know that Maxi Rodriguez will be wearing the amber and blue next year. He was one of the biggest free agents this offseason. And again, Rhode Island FC just showing again, we broke the mold on expansion. We're not resting on our laurels, as great as they were in this first year. How did you guys recognize that Maxi was a player that was going to bolster this team?
And the fans will have an opportunity to see this firsthand. So I'm first and foremost excited for Maxi and for the fans to see Maxi play. Having had the opportunity to speak with him at the very beginning of the process, he's an incredibly humble, genuine young man, right, who's worked for everything that he has. He has not taken anything for granted. So it's an amazing opportunity, I would say, for him, but also for us to have the opportunity to have him be part of what we're doing for the next 2+ years. It was really positive interactions with his representative. Enjoy the conversation with him, as always. Kano and Dave, talked him through what we do, how we do it. They're obviously an integral part of having Maxi make that decision. So, yeah, we do think that he is a player that will make us better, and we think that he's a player that will also fit nicely into the locker room and bring the same type of attributes and humbleness and grittiness that we already have.
I look at this roster's construction, and I guess I'd be curious, when you start crafting your ghost squads where you're looking for players in positions of need, do you build those out of the design of any formation that best suits the players? Last week we talked to Kano, and he talked about the evolution of what he thought would be a back four into a 3-5-2 system. But when you and him partner now, do you have like 500 different versions of roster formations constructed to see what kind of players best suit all of the available talent? Or at this point, are you going in very specifically looking at positions of need based on what's available and what the gaps are that remain in the current roster as it is?
I would say that, yeah, that's 100%. I think Kano had, and the team had a thought in mind as to how the initial playing style and formation would be. And like any good staff would do, instead of trying to jam a round peg into a square hole and say, this is what you're going to do, they were incredible the entire season of finding a formation and putting players in spots to amplify their strengths and mitigate their shortcomings, and while helping them improve on those things. And I think that was, you could see throughout the season how, as we improved throughout the season, that just didn't happen by accident. That wasn't just, oh, we played more games. That was a lot of work on the training ground, a lot of film work, and Kano and Dave and Marcos and Carl. Whereas we get ready for this coming season, as we evaluate players, I think you always want to have some players that are somewhat flexible and can play multiple positions. Not all of the players need to have that same level of flexibility. And in the end, that will be up to Kano and the staff in terms of, does the profile of players that we have now, does that give us an opportunity to look at each game a little bit differently and play a different formation based on who we're playing against? We certainly have that type of versatility within the squad now. And I think once we finish building out this squad, we'll have even more versatility. I think we still have some exciting things to come for the fans and yourself in the coming weeks. So, but mostly I would say we've focused in on kind of positions of need, or just player, regardless of position, that would come in and really make us better.
Kano once told me that the roster is never done. You had mentioned a couple times now in this conversation that you're already working on things like 2026 pretty soon. For you, in terms of timelines, looking ahead the next 12 months, maybe even 24 months, what are the things that are getting you the most excited about this team, this organization, and this product?
One, the stadium's obviously incredibly exciting, right? And so as you look into how the roster gets built out, continues to get built out in 25 and into 26 and beyond, the impact that stadium is going to have on the ability to draw players to want to be here, right? So that in and of itself is the most exciting thing, I would argue. I think it's really exciting to have the staff together, for another whole season. This isn't going to be our inaugural season. So we did a really nice job of things that didn't go well. No drama, made them better. So having the opportunity to see how we do this coming season at a variety of levels, administratively, on the field, off the field, recruitment-wise, bringing in a younger player potentially at some point that can really be something that can be exciting for us to develop and watch grow over the next couple of years. I think those are the things that are most exciting for me to kind of dig into and work on.
One of the things that excites me but scares me at the same time is the now addition of the USL Cup, the Jägermeister Cup. For me, looking at it, it's more games, it's more access for the fans, but it's also more games, right? So if you combine the 4 minimum games that you'll have to play, if you do well in that can expand it by, I think, 3 to 4 additional games. You sprinkle in the Open Cup. I think all the fans would like to see Rhode Island do a little bit of a deeper run in that as well. That adds wear and tear to the bodies, that adds minutes to the team. Is roster depth going to be more critical now than ever? And is the USL as a league setting everyone up organizationally to be able to go out and get the talent to have these deeper plays? Because if you expand the amount of games, and we don't know what the schedule will look
Mm-hmm.
like as of this recording, but assuming you're expanding the total number of games and the minutes on these players, what do you have to think about and do differently when you're trying to start adding the players that you need for the team? Or does it not change?
I don't know that it necessarily changes our roster construction for this season, whether the Jägermeister Cup was part of what we were doing or not. I think it changes roster management, which I don't think is a bad thing. And I mean, for the most part, I would say that we've done a really good job of taking anything that may have looked as being a somewhat of a negative or maybe not a positive and saying, well, how do we look at this? How do we use this opportunity for growth? And how do we spin this in a way that we get something out of it and that will help make us better? And that's how I would argue that we would look at these cup competitions, right? Because we're going to have 23 to 26 players. We're going to have 2 or 3 goalkeepers again, and we have we had some really good players last year, players that we didn't even end up bringing back, but they were top players that didn't have an opportunity to play in like the Jägermeister Cup, where those could have been real opportunities for them to get minutes, to grow, showcase themselves to not only the staff but other clubs and teams, and highlight what we're doing as a club. So I think we're going to really manage those things well. I think we'll give it some real thought as to how we do it, and whether that gives us something to play different formations. Those are all things that Kano will make decisions on, and as we've seen this year, he's really good at making good decisions. So I think I would look at it as more of an exciting opportunity than a drawback for us.
Then that's music to our ears. I want to end with this, going back to your teacher roots here for a second. If you had to go back and reflect on the entire season as a general manager only, Kano Smith, he's now in your classroom. What grade do you give him for the season?
Ooh, grade for Kano. He doesn't want to hear this question, right?
No, he never wants to hear anything about himself.
So, no, that's true. Kano is an incredibly humble person who wants all of the spotlight to be on the players and the staff that supports what he does. So if I were grading Kano, I think, like any report card, you'd have a series of things that you grade him on. And so I think, you'd have on the field, which I think the results speak for themselves. And those are only the things that the players got to, the fans got to see were at the games and how far we went. It's not to see all the work that went in on the training ground from January till November, right? So he has to get an A there. I would say he has to get an A. Then you would go, off the field, and how does he manage people and manage the group? And unlike the rest of us, he has to bridge the gap between, this side being in the office, the president of the club, and a lot of other things. And that's a lot. I manage his staff. And he is really interpersonal skills, proactive, really, really, really good at not responding until he's ready to respond. It's impressive to watch. And being able to having the opportunity to pull the curtain back, that not everyone gets to pull the curtain back and see Kano really do what he does. I think that it's been impressive to see. So I'd only have good grades for Kano. I would only have good grades, and he does a fair amount of self-reflection. So I think he wouldn't really need much feedback. And in fairness, when he does need to talk out or ask a question, we have some nice conversations. But he's his own man, and he takes feedback, and in the end, that you can give your thoughts, but he makes the decisions that he believes in, and I think he should continue doing that.
I agree. In Kano we trust. Sean, it has been a pleasure getting to finally sit down and talk to you about all things Rhode Island FC soccer. I want to wish you personally a happy new year and many more great things to come in your professional and your personal life. The floor is yours. What would you like to say to fans? What would you like to say to anyone listening? The final word is yours.
Thank you, Matt. Enjoyed this thoroughly. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much. I appreciated the thoughtfulness of the questions. I'm really looking forward to seeing the fans again soon. I mean, I know that was one of my favorite parts pregame at Bryant, was being able to have the proximity of being able to peek in and say hi to people and see them getting ready for the game. And we'll look forward to seeing people soon. That'll be exciting. So thanks for your support. We really appreciate it at a variety of levels. The people who traveled or were able to travel to Indy, to Louisville, to Charleston, to Colorado, amazing. Literally amazing. If I had a chance to shake hands with you and you stopped by and said hi to me, I just want to say thank you for that. Those are times we will always have together, and we're looking forward to making more memories with you in 2025.
We can't wait. And until then, Happy New Year to everyone. Happy holidays. Be safe, be well. And until then, make sure to go and check out our friends over at the Blazing Musket for all of your New England soccer coverage, and Rhode Island FC news at theblazingmusket.com. And then, of course, you can follow us on Twitter, Threads, TikTok, and Blue Sky at RIFC Podcast, the Instagram at Raising Anchor, and our own website, raisinganchorpodcast.com. Sean, Happy New Year's, and Anchor's up.